I want to get to Republican Senator Marco Rubio. He's on the Intelligence and Foreign Relations Committees. Senator, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it. I'm really interested in hearing your response to a specific excerpt from President Trump's speech in Saudi Arabia this morning, specifically this part. Quote, "We are not here to lecture. We are not here to tell other people how to live, what to do, who to be, or how to worship. Instead, we are here to offer partnership based on shared interests and values to pursue a better future for us all," unquote. Senator, frankly, I cannot imagine you ever saying anything like that when standing in a country like Saudi Arabia. Are you concerned at all about the president seemingly abdicating the very public role of the United States in standing up for democracy and human rights?
Well, I mean, yes, that would not have been a part of a speech that I would have delivered, for the reason that I think it's in our national security interest to advocate for democracy and freedom and human rights. Now, with a recognition that you may not get it overnight, there needs to be a period of transition. And I think further in that speech, they talk about gradual improvements in places, which I think is wise and pragmatic. That said, I would tell you that the White House and I have a different approach on the issue of human rights. I'm much more forceful and open and vocal about criticizing whether it's Egypt or Saudi Arabia for its human rights record. The White House is convinced they can get better results by addressing those issues in private, one-on-one. And in fairness, you know, there are issues we have raised with the White House. They have then raised it with foreign leaders and have gotten results. Aya Hijazi was released from Egypt, and Sandy Fangilis was released from China. But those are, you know, one case. There are thousands of these cases around the world. And so we just have a disagreement on the right way to approach it. And they have their approach and I have mine. But he's the president. And so our hope is that they will at least continue to raise these issues in private, as I am told they will do with Al-Sisi today, and raising the, or did with Al-Sisi on the NGO law that he has to, looks like there's a lot of pressure internally to impose on NGOs operating in Egypt, and likewise in Saudi Arabia. Pastor Raif Badawi and others who are being held unjustly, that those issues are going to be raised as well. But we just have a difference in approach, there's no doubt.
Let's turn to the issue consuming domestic politics here. You're a member of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Former FBI Director James Comey has agreed to testify publicly before your panel after Memorial Day. What are you going to ask him?
Well, I think the gist of the inquiry is going to be obviously about the things that have been reported on, and that is, did he keep these memos? What did those memos say, and why did he write it, and how did he feel? Did he ever feel like he was being put in a position where he couldn't do his job? There's no doubt that that's the questions that are going to get asked, and asked repeatedly, and the American people deserve to have an answer to that. And I'm happy that former Director Comey is going to appear publicly before the Intelligence Committee to answer these questions, so we can get it directly from him and not simply have to rely on a third-hand account of how he felt and or what was in those memos.
The White House has made it very clear they're going to attack James Comey's credibility. Do you think he's a credible person?
Well, I don't know him personally very well. I've interacted with him over a number of years on the Intelligence Committee. I've always found him to be respectful and forthcoming, particularly in closed settings. Very good at explaining what it is he was working on. I know others have differences with him, but I've never had any quarrel with James Comey. I always found him to be a patriotic, hardworking American who loved the country. Was he perfect? No. I imagine he would acknowledge that too. But I certainly have always had a lot of respect for him. And but we're going to have that testimony, and people will be able to make their own judgment.
President Trump, of course, calls all of this a witch hunt. What do you think of that?
Well, I wouldn't use the term witch hunt. Look, these issues are being raised in the press, okay? People are going to the press who appear to be in the know, or at least pretend to be in the know. They leak information, the press reports on it. These questions need to be answered. Unlike some other people, I am one of the 15 people in the Senate that serve on the Senate Intelligence Committee. A lot of people have said, well, you're being very cautious about this. I am, and here's why. Because the credibility of our investigation depends on every single one of us in that committee going in without any preconceived notions. I've told everybody, I want to know the truth. I want to know the entire truth. I want us to put it in a report, and I wanted to share it with you and the whole country so people can reach their own conclusion. But the reason why the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, who's a good guy, had to recuse himself is because he was taking hard positions in one direction or another on these issues. And so I don't want to prejudge any of this. I acknowledge the media reports raise questions that need answers, but let's get to the facts. Let's establish the facts, and then people can make a concrete opinion or take a concrete opinion on these matters. But until then, it's my obligation to reserve judgment on all of this until all the information is in and we've analyzed it together and not just based on media reports. I think that's the right thing to do for the country, because we need an Intelligence Committee report that people have confidence in. We're not going to have that if the members of the committee are out there in front of the press already having made up their mind before the whole report is together.
I want to play something you said on the campaign trail back in November when Hillary Clinton was running for president. Take a listen.
I would just ask everybody this: can this country afford to have a president under investigation by the FBI who can be involved? Think of the trauma that would do to this country.
Can this country afford to have a president under investigation by the FBI? Obviously, it's Trump's campaign team, not necessarily him, that's under investigation by the FBI.
Yeah,
but do you think that this is causing trauma to the country?
Well, let's be clear. Number one, the FBI has not said that the president is under investigation. They don't discuss those things, so let's be clear about that. Second, I would say to you that if in fact he ever becomes, or any president for that matter, of course that's not good for the country. And that's why I think it's important that we finish our work in a way that's credible. So the Intelligence Committee is going to review it with a primary focus on counterintelligence, but I imagine in the process we may discover facts that are relevant to former Director Mueller's look at this. I think Mueller's appointment is going to look at this in a way that's thorough, and I hope that everybody cooperates with his efforts so he can quickly reach a conclusion and make a decision about moving forward or not moving forward. That's in the best interest of the country. Quite frankly, it's in the best interest of the Trump administration to have something that is thorough and fair and above reproach and as quickly as possible so the country can move on in one way or another. But there's no doubt that this cloud is impacting everything else, and I think the White House would acknowledge that. So we need to get over this once and for all, and the best way to do it is to have a process in place to arrive at the facts, no matter what they are. And whatever those facts are, that's what we need to make our decisions on.
But it seems as though the White House is standing in the way of the process to get to the facts. Look at the new bombshell from the New York Times, the newspaper reporting that when President Trump went behind closed doors in the Oval Office with Russian officials, he told them that firing FBI Director James Comey had relieved great pressure on him. Let me go over the words with you. Quote, "I just fired the head of the FBI. He was crazy, a real nut job. I faced great pressure because of Russia. That's taken off." What was your response when you read those comments?
Well, again, those responses are based on notes that I haven't seen, and neither have you. I'm not denying that I'm not admitting that they are. We don't know. And that's why we need to have an inquiry that looks at all of that. That's why I asked the White House to produce those notes to the Intelligence Committee so we could review it. And I thought that was important, and I continue to believe it's important for them to do. But again, I go back to the point that I made, and that is, irrespective of all those reports, Director Mueller is going to do his thing with regards to the work that he now has. The Intelligence Committee is going to continue to do its work. You will have now at least two separate places that I hope will reach conclusions based on facts that people can trust. And that's what I am investing my time and energy in. And so when I'm cautious about commenting on these things is because I do not want to undermine the credibility of this effort in one direction or another. It is in the best interest of this country for the Senate Intelligence Committee to produce a report based on facts that everyone has confidence in, and not some sort of open-ended thing that continues to, spiral this thing out of control.
Of course, the White House is not disputing those comments as reported in the New York Times. And I guess there are a lot of Americans who are looking at this growing body of information and wondering what exactly is going on here. We have the comments that he made to the Russian officials, according to that document. President Trump recently told NBC's Lester Holt that the Russia investigation was on his mind when he made the decision to fire Director Comey. Take a listen.
But regardless of recommendation, I was going to fire Comey, knowing there was no good time to do it. And in fact, when I decided to just do it, I said to myself, I said, this Russia thing with Trump and Russia is a made-up story. It's an excuse by the Democrats for having lost an election that they should have won.
So we have that. We have what he told the Russians, according to that document. A source close to Comey tells us that President Trump urged the FBI director to back off investigating Michael Flynn. This is in a Comey memo, saying, "I hope you can let this go." As an attorney, as a U.S. senator, do you consider this to be a growing body of evidence that the president might have attempted to obstruct justice?
We don't know yet. Number one, I haven't seen those notes. Number two, we have yet to take the testimony from Director Comey. You say someone who knows him says, well, we're going to have him in 2 weeks in front of the Intelligence Committee. He'll be asked that question. So in 2 weeks, we'll know a lot more based on the testimony that he gives under oath before the committee and the country publicly. Until then, we won't know. As far as the president's comment, that's always been the White House's position, that this whole thing is a farce. That's their position. Our job in the Intelligence Committee has been to look at this entire episode for the purposes of counterintelligence in particular, and then arrive at the facts, put them out in a report, and move on from there. And that's what we're endeavoring to do in a bipartisan way. And again, the best way to do that is not to litigate it in the press, but to do our work and put the report in a way that is credible so no one can deny its credibility and no one can say that we went into it already having made up our minds. This I can tell you for a fact. No matter what the facts are, I want them to go wherever they take us, irrespective of what outcome it reaches, one way or the other. My interests here are clear, and I don't think anyone has ever doubted the concern that I have about Russian interference. Back in October, I was running for re-election, and it looked like my race was going to be very close. I may have been the only Republican in the country running for Congress who refused to discuss WikiLeaks, use it against my opponent, or use it against Secretary Clinton, because I said it was the work of a foreign intelligence agency. I said it then, I believe it now. I think our report will lay that out, and any other facts pertinent to that.
When you're looking for these facts, let me just ask you, if you come to the conclusion that President Trump fired James Comey because he wanted to relieve the pressure of the FBI investigation into his campaign team, would that disturb you? Would that be obstruction of justice?
Well, again, I think, let me say it this way. If any president tries to impede an investigation, any president, no matter who it is, by interfering with the FBI, yes, that would be problematic. It would be, not just problematic, it would be, obviously a potential obstruction of justice that people have to make a decision on. Any president. That said, we don't know if that's what's happened here. And we can't make that decision, and I'm certainly going to not make pronouncements at that level of magnitude solely on the basis of what an anonymous source told the press. I am not disputing the press accounts, but I am also not going to accept them, especially being in the position that I'm in, where we're going to have access to Director Comey, hopefully to the notes, and to all sorts of other information that will give us true, complete insight into all of this. That's only fair to the president. That's only fair to the country. But we need to go through the steps to get there. Otherwise, this appears political and partisan, and there'll be ongoing doubts about whatever we find if we don't do it that way.
There are a lot of Democrats and independents who liked you, Senator Rubio, when you were running for the Republican nomination, and a number of them voted for you when you ran for Senate. What's your message to them when they say at home, you know what, if this was a Democratic president doing all the things that President Trump is doing, Republicans like Marco Rubio would be very, very vocal and very, very critical, more so than they are now?
That wouldn't be accurate. I would encourage them to talk to my Democratic colleagues on the Intelligence Committee and ask them, do I take my role in that committee seriously? Am I in that committee acting as a partisan, or am I in that committee acting as an American? Ask them. I think everybody on that committee, in my view, is approaching this as an American, not as a partisan. It's one of the reasons why the Select Committee on Intelligence is so unique. Most of our hearings are not in front of cameras, and therefore some of that partisan some of that incentive to perhaps act in a partisan way is taken away. But also because we understand there are only 15 people in the Senate that have access to this information. We have an important job to do for the 85 of our other colleagues. So I'm doing this in what's in the best interest of the country. And the bottom line is, unlike the other 85 senators, I am actively involved in looking at this. And if I'm out there right now taking a position defending the president or attacking the president, it undermines my credibility and my opinion and my work on this investigation. Let us finish our work. Let us collect the facts. Let us document them. Let us put it out in a report. And then, based on that, I will take a firm position. And then people could say whatever they want to say. But we've got to finish our work. That's my job, and that's what I'm going to do.
For the record, it is true for anybody watching at home that Democrats on the Senate Intelligence Committee do say that about Senator Rubio. I want to turn to the dire situation in Venezuela. I know this is an issue you care quite a bit about, and you've spoken quite a bit about. The country's president, Nicolas Maduro, delivered a scathing critique of President Trump on Friday. He told him to stop intervening. He said, quote, "Get your pig hands out of here." What is your response to President Maduro, and what else needs to be done to stop the suffering of the people of Venezuela?
Well, Maduro's not a president. He's a dictator right now. He's canceled the Constitution. They basically tried to nullify the National Assembly. And what solves the situation in Venezuela is not problematic. They have to follow their own Constitution. That's it. Follow the Constitution that Chavez put in place. Hold an election. They are scheduled to hold elections this year. Hold an election. I believe that there isn't an election, any free and fair election in Venezuela. There's no way that Maduro's group wins. Hold an election. That's what needs to happen. That's the solution. And that's what he's standing in the way of. And that's what he refuses to do. And in the process, he's destabilizing the entire region. And luckily, you are starting to see breaks in there. The Attorney General of Venezuela is repeatedly breaking from the Maduro regime and the things that they're doing. I think hopefully there'll be people in the military that refuse to continue to cooperate with these human rights violations that are occurring. And I thank the White House. We worked on it for weeks with them, and I thank them for coming forward and sanctioning these fraudulent puppets on the Supreme Court of Venezuela, who basically are just rubber stamps for whatever Maduro tells them to do. They should be sanctioned, and there are more people to come because they are stealing the money of the Venezuelan nation to enrich themselves, and they're spending it here in the United States to buy homes in Florida and invest in properties and private jets in the state of Florida and in the United States. We should sanction and seize those properties that they are purchasing with the treasure of Venezuela's people.
Senator Marco Rubio, Republican of Florida, thank you so much for your time, sir. We always appreciate it.
Thank you very much.